All right, time goes fast when you're having fun. Let's go ahead and when you're ready, come on back. We're getting ready for our next presenter. We're going to be focusing now on Gotham 2020, New York City, how torture treatment centers are responding to a year like no other. I want to go ahead and invite Dr. Hawthorne Smith, who is a licensed psychologist and the director of the Bellevue program for survivors of torture. He's been with the program since its inception in 1995. And Dr. Smith, whenever you're ready, we'd love to have you join us.
I am here. I hope you can hear me. I know you can't see me. I'm trying to start my video and it's telling me the host has stopped it. But I am here and I want to thank all of you from the consortium. And this presentation is going to be a bit more experiential as opposed to data-driven. But we wanted to really start off, and one distinction I wanted to make was between sort of a self-referential focus as opposed to a conceit. Because as I was sitting down and thinking about something that I might be able to contribute to this meeting, I realized that it has to go way beyond me and really join my wonderful team of colleagues here at the program. And then we thought about Dinali Fernando and her incredible crew down at Libertas, and as a way of trying to tell the story of New York City. And with that, with New York and all of its vastness and everything, we realized that it is just a small slice of what we have been facing as a consortium, that there is no hierarchy at all to this. You know, it's really about a shared mission, a shared humanity. So we want to salute all of you in terms of what you have been going through over these last 12 to 13 months. We salute our sister programs in the Midwest and the Southeast who bore the brunt of the second surge that was so maddeningly avoidable. Our sister programs in California who became the epicenter of the pandemic while significant portions of the state were literally on fire. Our good friends in Oregon and Minnesota who were dealing with not only this, but social upheaval while some of their major cities were actually under the occupation of the National Guards. Our good friends in Texas who were dealing with marginalized populations during an unprecedented freeze where people honestly did not have the heat and the drinking water to go forward, as well as our friends in Washington, D.C., who not only provide services, but advocate and work on litigation at a time when there was an actual insurrection being plotted and visited upon them. So we understand that what we have seen in New York is particular in terms of its sort of timeline and scope. And we're just hoping that what we are able to share with you today is something that will be useful as we go forward, because this crisis isn't over. And unfortunately, we feel that there might be others downstream. The night is young. So anyway, we just want to thank you and we hope that this will be helpful. Next slide, please. Again, I mentioned Dinali Fernando and her team at Libertas, and just to reflect on what it was like when the pandemic really first came to our shores in a very real way. That initial onslaught and just the fear and the uncertainty and actually almost like a feeling of disbelief at first. At first it was something we were hearing about transpiring in Wuhan. And then a few weeks later, there was a huge outbreak in what was going on in Italy. And next thing you know, the epicenter was in Queens. And we were definitely in survivor mode. And I don't know if any of you remember right around that time, sometimes we'd have consortium meetings and everything, and Dinali would come and visit us, and she would be coming right from the ICU in her scrubs. And it was kind of like, this is very real, this is happening. And Elmhurst and thereby Libertas were right at the center of the neighborhood where so much was going on. Bellevue was hit in a very significant way, not as hard as they were in Queens, but we were also taking in patients from all 5 boroughs. So it almost felt like New York was kind of this canary in a coal mine where we were going through these incidents at first. So what were the first reactions? What did we do? As you know, here in New York, we're sort of clustered in around one another. And, you know, my wife and I, sometimes at night, we listen through the window or up on the roof of our building, and we would call it the serenade of sirens. And we would hear these sirens, and knowing what that meant, that somebody was on the brink of perhaps losing their life. And how does one react? And I think that our centers, as well as many who have already spoken, some of the first reactions were just outreach, reaching out to our clients to help reduce that sense of uncertainty and fear, to help them remain connected. And between Libertas and Bellevue, we were able to contact more than 800 clients and their families. And they presented with a wide-ranging array of health, emotional, financial, and legal needs. So a lot of this, what we were doing at first was really around triage and providing information, because as we well know from this work, that oftentimes even with the asylum process, that the only thing worse than a lack of information is misinformation. And there was so much misinformation rampant, still rampant, but particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. I remember at one point having a conversation with Dinali, and I think this is something she shared with others, is that she gave the very pertinent advice that if you have somebody who is fearful that they have COVID or that they have manageable symptoms, please let them know to stay home and to quarantine and to isolate, as opposed to coming right to the emergency rooms, because at that point the onslaught was such that people were staying in the emergency rooms for dozens of hours before they could even be really seen in terms of getting a bed, and felt like it was more of an opportunity to spread the virus or perhaps catch the virus for those who might have just been anxious. So again, information was very, very key. Next slide, please. And so a lot of what we were seeing and how we tried to respond really followed along the lines of Maslow's hierarchy. We were really looking at food and the associated food insecurity, housing issues, people who were being menaced because of falling behind on rent, whatever it might be, utility bills, phone access, the safety of family members, either within the community or overseas. This was not the time at first for in-depth psychodynamic or psychoanalytic processes. It was really about helping people to feel held and part of a community and giving them the information and the tools that they needed. We, as well as Elmhurst, really tried to put into place creative and sort of a full court press in terms of people reaching out to those in the society. And one of the things that it really did was help to reinforce the notion of interdisciplinary collaboration. There was no longer this hierarchy of MD to Ph.D. to LCSW to intern to extern. We were just team members. We were just community members reaching out. And with that, we were really able to do a lot in terms of concrete assistance, in terms of financial assistance. And, you know, I sort of take both programs together. We at Bellevue, we scrambled, and we were able to get, 5,000 here, 10,000 here, 15, and we knew we were just doing what we could to provide emergency cash assistance to clients. Was when talking to Dinali and sort of seeing what they were able to do at Elmhurst and Libertas was really, really impressive. I was talking to our operations director, Caroline Albanese, and I was like, we are really at this sort of lemonade stand, car wash sort of level of fundraising here. So I'm going to put some of that together as a group so we don't feel so bad. I don't know if Freud ever talked about fundraising envy, but if he didn't, it's a real thing. But between the two programs, we were able to raise more than $300,000. And we also want to give big thank yous to the IRCT, to ORR, to the public hospital system here in New York City, H&H, who also really helped to fund. And with this money, we were able to give direct grants to more than 400 clients and their families during this period. We all learned how to pronounce Zelle and do those deposits. We were providing gift cards, and we were doing or actually just direct assistance. Libertas was able to give more than 2,000 masks at the beginning when folks didn't have it. Non-perishable foods. We were helping for people to get their prescriptions in their neighborhoods if they couldn't come in. For people who did not have access to functioning telephones during this period of telehealth, we were able to actually purchase phones for them and get to it so that nobody would fall through the cracks and really be isolated. Again, as I mentioned, it was an interdisciplinary approach with no hierarchy. It was multi-directional, multimodal communication and triage. But again, our best teachers and our guides tend to be our clients. And it was just amazing to work with folks who were so essential to our community in terms of what they bring, in terms of what they do. When we think about who is out there working with our elders who are in the nursing homes, whether HHAs or CNAs or people who were driving our Ubers and Lyfts and keeping the city moving, stocking our shelves, people who are working in the agricultural field, working in meatpacking plants, we could not have moved forward as a society if it wasn't for the input of our clients. And yet they remained marginalized throughout. Maybe not able to access the stimulus checks or get unemployment due to where their asylum application was or wasn't. But that didn't stop them. Our clients were not daunted. I give the example here from Bellevue. I have been blessed to co-facilitate a group for French-speaking African clients. We're going into our 25th year. And when the pandemic hit, all group services stopped as we tried to figure out what we could do by Zoom, what we could do by WebEx, what would the hospital hierarchy allow, what was deemed as appropriate and safe. But what we saw at that point was our clients did not wait. They set up their own sort of collaboration through Zoom, and they called it Le Village Virtuel, the virtual village. And we were able to do group therapy for 2 or 3 weeks before we were technically allowed to do so by the hospital auspices. It was informal, but it was extraordinarily necessary, and just yet another example of how our clients are survivors and not just victims. Next slide, please. But then things moved on during the course of the year. And not only were we dealing with the pandemic, but the social justice movement, the social upheaval that went along with that. And we were hearing from our clients this sense of re-traumatization. Like, man, this reminds me of what happened in Kinshasa or Kingston or Kabul before I had to flee. There was a large distrust of systems. And as the asylum system ground to a halt, and people would come to me and essentially say, if here in this country, no one cares about you and your family, what chance do we have? Who are we in this mix? And many of the clients seem to almost speak, well, we're caught up in it, but we're on the outside looking in. This feels like a white American, black American schism. Who am I to have a voice? We're impacted, but again, totally marginalized. But through conversations, through therapy, we began to see a change. At that point, again, my wife and I, we would sit up at night and we would hear that same serenade of sirens, but it had a totally different meaning. But clients helped to work their way through it, and we found that for many of our clients who were abused in their home countries because of their advocacy for democratization and human rights, because of their advocacy for gender-based equality, because of their advocacy for LGBTQ rights, for religious rights, whatever that is, that those are aspects of a global struggle for human rights, that they are intrinsic to an awakening that goes beyond national borders, goes beyond linguistic groups, and particular flashpoints, that they no longer felt like they were just on the outside looking in, but this is another manifestation of human rights work they were doing at home and hope to continue here. In fact, I was very moved I remember having a group session on January 8th when we were still reeling from what we saw and what we were going through after the January 6th insurrection. And as I was probably feeling the lowest I felt about this country and our prospects in a very long time, we had group members say, oh my goodness, we are so proud of this country and what you have gone through, the institutions held. We know what a coup looks like. And on January 6th, we were worried when we saw what was happening on the Capitol. We were worried for that next news report that the barracks at such and such military base emptied, that the soldiers were in the street and all that. But when we saw that didn't happen and your legislators came back and finished their job, we knew that this country is really a special place. And I tell you, their perspective was healing and a balm for me personally. Next slide, please. Another thing that was very important during this time period was the interdisciplinary capacity building. You are all aware of the great steps that the consortium has taken, our community of practice, webinars and seminars, and just to underscore the notion that 2 watchdogs are 10 times better than 1. And knowing that you folks were there and that we were not alone with what we were doing and being able to share was crucial to us. We also did a lot of training. And again, this goes across disciplines where, for example, I was called to train with our Division of General Internal Medicine for many of our docs who are on the front lines doing this work, who realized that it wasn't just their patients. It wasn't just the people who were infected. It was all the people who are affected. People who couldn't mourn properly. People dealing with anxiety and depression. Reaching out to some of the legal advocacy groups across the country. This goes across discipline. But the fact that we were in a position to help to shed light on some of these processes, it was really helpful. And this notion of subversive wellness was very important. We learned this again from our clients who talked about this idea of subversive healing, that they have been targeted, that torture and human rights abuses are frequently put out there to break the will of an individual so that those in power can further oppress marginalized populations. But by someone standing up for their own dignity, their own humanity, is in a way fighting back against these oppressive forces. And this idea of subversive healing was something that we were able to borrow and realize that subversive wellness, trying to find ways to take care of ourselves, trying to even give ourselves a break in those moments when we felt very, very low, was not a distraction from the work we were doing. It was not something that took away from validity of what we were trying to put out there. Wellness, taking care of ourselves, is actually part of the fight to resist some of these oppressive and crisis-driven stressors that we were facing. So we really hope that that is also something we will keep in mind, that taking care of ourselves is not just a side dish or what have you. It is part and parcel of the work we do. Next and last slide, please. Some of the lessons learned, and again, I want to thank Dinali for her insight and sharing some of these things. It's really around the power of family, the power of the community, a sense of shared humanity, a breaking down of these perhaps fabricated delineations between caregivers and the clients we serve, and we realize that we are all members of a community that is in crisis. The l'esprit de partage, a sense of a sharing spirit. And, you know, as I went through, and my family has just gone through some things recently where we were dealing with unwanted and unavoidable and uncontrollable family separations that we could not fix. And just having to deal with that for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, imagining what our clients go through in the sense of years of family separation. And as I mentioned this to people, it was amazing that the clients and how they responded and wanting to support me and wanting to support my family. And at first I was really sort of, oh, that's I've ruined the boundaries and the therapeutic frame and what have you. But soon I began to relax and realize that I just needed to accept the blessings of their prayers, of their support, the true benediction of being in a community with such folks. And then as I engage with them, and I think as we engage, understanding the importance of authenticity, that we've all experienced loss. We are all sometimes feeling that we don't have control over what's going on, starting from there. I know sometimes when clients come to us around the asylum process and they'll say, can you guarantee that I will win, that I will get asylum? And we're always like, we cannot promise the results, but we can promise the effort. Just as we can promise that we can walk along with our clients during this process, again, as part of a shared community. But there are times when it became overwhelming, and I'll speak from the I, and doing so much work to try to convince people that it's not the time to give up. But sometimes when people are really approaching that point of losing hope, and I felt that I was about to give up on the effort of trying to help others to not give up. And as happenstance would have it, as I was trying to work through these processes, I found a book that had fallen on the floor. It was my old version of The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And some of what he writes about is the fact that as we near our goal, the resistance will become more ferocious. The pushback will be more evident. It's almost a sign that we're approaching, and he really helps us to, he uses the language of not wanting to be that person that has traversed an entire desert and then dies of thirst just as the palm trees of the oasis are in sight. I'm holding tight to this notion that springtime is coming, both in the literal sense and also in the metaphoric sense. We see progress between Elmhurst and Bellevue Hospital, and I haven't even seen the latest numbers yet, but I know these hospitals have treated well more than 5,000 people suffering from COVID who have been treated and released back into the community. It's life-saving work. The fact that, we see people now who are beginning to get the vaccine, the fact that we've gone through the election process, the things that we're moving toward. Springtime is coming. But with all that and with that optimism we like to put forth, with that optimism we've learned from our community members, there are a couple of things I wanted to point out too. That everything I've talked about, everything we've talked about today, all of the efforts, all of the insight, the sleepless nights, the hours, the extra hours we put in, none of it is sufficient. We have not cured the disease. It's still rampant. Some states are about ready to open up again. We have not ended systemic racism. That monster has come up and resurfaced from the deep end, and we're struggling with it right now. We've gone through the election process, but our democracy is still fragile. So nothing we have done has solved the problems and therefore is not sufficient. But everything we have done, everything we are doing is important. Every effort you have made, everything you are doing has been necessary. And I think that one day when we get the opportunity to look back at this special period that we've been through 2020 and 2021, when someone asks what you did, you will be able to say that you tried and you put forth the best effort you can. And that is extraordinarily important and necessary. In my family, there's a phrase my father used to always use. It says, in the effort lies the art. And with these few little experiences and insights, on behalf of my wonderful friends and colleagues here at PSOT, to Dinali and her incredible team at Libertas, we just want to say that we recognize you and what you are doing, and hope that you will hold on to the fact that what you are doing is so important and so necessary, and that you keep it up. Spring is coming, and we thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Smith. There's an outpouring of gratitude and thanks in the chat, so I really hope that you can sit and hold space for those wonderful comments. I did see one question. Is there, if you really were to sum up the takeaway from this experience, in addition to what you've said, would there be anything that you would add to really for folks to hold on to?
You know, it might be towards where we just ended up. You know, I think that sometimes in doing this work, we have to set our expectations at a reasonable level and know that we cannot solve all of the world's problems for even a particular survivor that is in front of us. But what we can do is walk with them and help to put them in a position where they can solve their problems, where they can overcome. And understanding, again, that what we do in my work, I've never cured anybody, but I have been blessed to walk with a lot of people who have gotten better. And so I think sort of holding that and realizing that it is really this effort, this sense of shared humanity that we put forth every single day, that's the curative factor. That's what we bring to the ballgame. So that's where I'm sitting right now.
Thank you again so much for sharing and for really holding the space for us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.